Okay then, I'm live and I'm vertical, I don't care. I'm doing vertical. I am Brian of London in Israel. So it's Sunday morning here, I'm in my office because we go back to work on Sundays. But the flip side is, of course, that Friday is a day off. So we're not like 2 hours from the UK, we're actually 26 hours from the UK. What happened yesterday with the Tommy Robinson protests in London and elsewhere, all over the place actually, was amazing to see. Because, as far as I can tell, Tommy is back, unbelievably, not leading because he can't do anything. He is not directing anything. He is in prison. He is not really able to decide what goes on around and outside. So what has happened is a street protest movement has spontaneously sprung up behind him, which is amazing because, as far as I know, Tommy really didn't want to be in charge of a street protest movement ever again after the EDL days. I mean, I've talked with him about that. The EDL was a hell of a thing to get started, but it was an impossible cat to control. And the reason it was impossible to control was some of the stuff we saw happening yesterday, which is, for sure, infiltration and agents provocateurs, and I got no proof of this sitting where I am. You can't prove these things immediately, but all the signs are there. What happens? But there's an actual there's a reason why this time is different from the EDL. Almost a decade ago, and I'll get to that at the end. And then when I get to that, you'll understand why these measures will not work the way they worked with the EDL. So what did the government do to shut the EDL down? They got desperate. Firstly, Tommy and the guys were always trying to organize their marches responsibly, but they chose to march in towns that had a history of Muslim rape gangs. Now, at the time, this was not known. This was not in the press. But the people in those towns knew. The councils knew. The police knew, but they were covering it up. Remember, this is all pre-Andrew Norfolk writing his report, writing his newspaper articles. This is before Rotherham, before any of these places became well known. And if you go look at the places that EDL held particularly famous demos, each one of those towns has gone on to either have or is about to have a scandal with lots of men being on trial for rape gang stuff. So Tommy and the EDL leadership always tried to work with the police, and they were always shafted at the last minute. Plans would be changed. There would be reasons why they couldn't hold the demo the way they had. They'd organised it. But you have to remember that the EDL was back in the days before Facebook was a big thing. The EDL was not organised through Facebook or through any of the major social networks. It wasn't Twitter or Facebook. The main organisation unit of the EDL was football clubs, was the network of football fans that was pre-existing, that the EDL tapped into. And this was offline. This was people who met in pubs. So the vast majority of the organisational stuff for the EDL was not online. The government couldn't get to it so easily. Now, they had a forum, and I used to read that forum from Israel. And that's actually how I got to understand what the EDL was and what it wasn't. And it wasn't a neo-Nazi far-right organisation, because I could see what happened when people came into their forums trying to come with the whole, what today the alt-right calls the JQ, the Jewish question. They were not treated well, and they were not, it just wasn't, it didn't have a safe home at the EDL. People tried to bring it in, and as soon as Tommy got sent to prison, it infiltrated, because as Douglas Murray says, if you keep calling something far right, then the far right want to join it. If you keep saying that they're neo-Nazis, then the neo-Nazis want to join it. The EDL was never those things under Tommy, but they kept trying to join. Now, some of them, and this comes on to how the government tried to destroy the EDL, there was definite infiltration by government agents. Now, there's been a long-running court case in the UK about a police operation to break up animal rights protests. and one of the policemen had actually married, whilst being married to another wife, he'd married one of the people he'd met during this infiltration of these animal rights extremists. So that the police do that. That's what Special Branch or whichever part of the deep state of Britain and the intelligence services of Britain do. So if they see the so-called far right as a threat. Now, of course, there was one policeman who came out and said that the EDL was never far right, and he was correct, and he was admonished for actually bothering to say that out loud, because you study the documents, the literature, the charter of the EDL, it had no elements of the far right. It was almost a libertarian organisation. In fact, it classed itself as a human rights organisation fighting for the right to protest and to hold street protests. So the police were trying to infiltrate it, and they did. I mean, looking back now, and having talked it through with some of the other people on the forums, we know some of the names on the forums who were probably instigators and infiltrators. And they would also send these people to demos. And one of the best things that they would want to do is, and whether this was the government or government-backed organisations like Hope Not Hate, you know, the ultra-far left communist infiltration organisations, they would want to send someone into the crowd to throw a Nazi salute. That was like gold dust. And every time that happened, there would be a high-quality journalist with a decent camera perfectly positioned to catch the Nazi salute. At one of these demos, someone did that near Tommy. Tommy headbutted him, or punched him, I can't remember. Tommy was arrested, obviously. Again, Douglas Murray brings this up. Tommy was arrested for headbutting a Nazi, charged with assault. Charges were dropped, but nobody remembers. You know, they just remember arrested for assault, not arrested for punching a Nazi. So that's one of the key ways. So you put instigators in. Now look, with the EDL, it was a bunch of often beard up, drunk football fans who like to fight. Look, there's no point sugarcoating it. That was the base of the EDL, and they did at times have women going to some of the demos, but largely it was footy fans, salt of the earth, good people. But if you put somebody in the crowd who wants to make trouble, and then you add two other elements, and this was what the police did every single time, they would put so-called Antifa, so-called anti-fascists, the fascists of so-called Antifa would be put near enough to the EDL to be able to throw a bottle, throw something, chant, do whatever it takes to get a rise. And then they would have the police. And I used to come in, so I used to read the forums. Now, the forums were not real-time. It wasn't like live streaming like Facebook. There was much less video around because the cell phones didn't have the features that we have today. And that's part of the clue as to why this is different. So you'd look on the next day, if it was a Saturday demo, you'd look on Sunday and you'd read what was written on the forums by people who were there. And it was stories about being battened by police, being on the edge of a kettle. So the police would lock you up and use barricades and stuff. And then if an arm got pushed through the barricade, the police would just whack it with a truncheon. There were police horse charges. There was all sorts of shit that went on. People got seriously hurt amongst the EDL from the police. Absolutely. And Antifa were always nearby. They would sometimes separate out a group of EDL and then not allow them to join a demo and then send them past Antifa to get beaten up or to have a fight, because the goal was always to have a headline like EDL clashes with police, EDL clashes with anti-fascists. That would be the goal. And I could see that yesterday in the Daily Mail article. The first thing they come up with, 1,000 EDL people clash, 1,000 Tommy Robinson supporters clash with police. That was like a headline they wrote the night before in consultation with the police. But when you look at the bigger picture today, what we've got today is we've got multiple live streaming angles. Now, there are some that caught a bit of aggravation at the end, but very few. And when I look at the thousands of comments on Tommy's Facebook page, most of them had a very, very good time. And what happens is this. And firstly, and also this crowd was men and women. I saw children there. So it's jumped the shark. It is no longer football fans, okay? It is much wider appeal. It's not working class football fans only. They are there. They are there. And the reason, and that's a good thing, is because the idea that you could send half a dozen unwashed, masked up anti-fascists, they're scared. They're scared. They don't want to show up to that. So it's left only to the police to cause trouble. And the police are a bit more constrained because everybody's live streaming. So, yeah, shit's going to happen. Police going to try and break it up. Police going to try and make trouble happen. We heard all the stories that they were making announcements on tannoys in train stations that had been cancelled. Typical. They kept some people in Trafalgar Square, didn't allow them down, so the crowd would have been even bigger. All of this is going to happen. Kettling is going to happen. Kettling is where the police just arbitrarily say, oh, we're not going to allow this group of people to move over to there. Kettle them. Keep them there for hours. One of the early stories Tommy tells is when I think was it his mother or somebody's mother was kettled like this, an elderly woman had to pee in the streets. This is the shit that's going to go down. But today, now, not that Facebook's a great thing, and I wish people weren't organising on Facebook. I wish we had like a third party, another site to use. But Facebook's still working for this. The issue now is that 20,000 people showed up yesterday, and 19,900 of them had a great time and saw no violence. Okay, 19,900 people will tell hundreds of thousands of people a story that is utterly different from what the Daily Mail is telling. Totally. And Daily Mail is probably a good one. I haven't even looked at what the Independent and all the others are saying. When 20,000 people have a positive reinforced feeling, and then they read the negative newspapers, they're going to, of course, trust their own feelings. Their close circle of friends is going to trust their friends, not the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail and the press and everybody who reports wrongly is just driving themselves down. And you know, Trump started this idea of fake news, of pointing out the fake news, but it's snowballing now. It's snowballing so fast that what you're doing with these rallies, when they pass off peacefully, but the headlines say they didn't, you're doing enormous brand damage to all of the media, which is fantastic. Because I've watched them lie about Israel for 25 years. I mean, I know what they do. They lied about the EDL, exactly the same techniques. The same nonsense about peaceful protests in Gaza is the same nonsense about having a violent protest in London. It's just a different twist. That's what they do. So when you know the truth, and you tell your friends the truth, but the Daily Mail is at complete 180 degree odds to what you saw, who are you going to trust? You're going to trust your friends. You're going to trust what you saw with your own idea, with your own eyes. And that's the very important difference from now back to the EDL. The EDL, within the circles of the EDL, which was largely football fans meeting in pubs all up and down England, and it was not predominantly online. There was an online component, but I always knew, and I knew from friends who went to demos, that the online component of the EDL was smaller than the offline component. Today, we're going to have the football fans who still have their massive offline networks, and then we're going to be joined by the growing majority of the British people who cannot stand to see what's happening to their country. They just can't. And I think that the government's options for shutting this down by subterfuge and infiltration and that kind of thing, when it gets this big, terribly, terribly weak. And I tell you, the other massive problem that they're going to have is that this movement is somewhat leaderless, because you've decapitated Tommy, you've put him in prison. Now, I mean, he's got surrogates and he's got all the people who spoke yesterday. I mean, you got the number 2 guy in Holland. The number 2 politician, Geert Wilders, flew in. And you also had, by the way, people don't know who he is, Philip de Winter, who I actually met and had lunch with some years ago. He's got a checkered past, but I actually think he's a good guy. Those 2 guys are senior politicians. I mean, Philip de Winter leads the Flemish movement in Belgium. So, anyway, It's very different from the EDL days. Things are going to happen differently. The government's going to try and stop it. The government's going to try and break it up. There's going to be scandals. There's going to be violence tried to push upon it. But I don't think it will be able to work as well as it used to, because the numbers will be bigger. So if next time it's 30,000 people or 40,000 people who try to come to London, it's much harder for the police to try and make a small bit of aggravation in a corner appear as the primary purpose of the demonstration. It isn't. The primary purpose of the demonstrations is to say there's stuff being covered up in Britain. The conditions that everybody's living under are not what they thought they were. It's not a free country. You can't speak freely. You can't move freely. You can't associate freely. And that's not the nature of Britain. Anyway, have a good day. I'm here in Israel, and speak to you all soon.